Hello, I'm Jovin James, and I'll be briefly talking about Meetup. Meetup is an app that allows users to connect them to their friends and find the nearest events for them and their friends to attend. The main project idea is that the user can create groups and invite their friends to the group and search for nearby events which the user and their friends can attend. What you see is the main class diagram of the app. Um, some of the stuff is the UI table view cell, and the UI view controller, which all the other view controllers inherit from to get the main data source and the delegate methods. Some of the text view and the text field delegates, which manage the keyboard behaviors, as well as the controller delegates and the navigation controller delegates to show additional information and additional pictures and so on and so forth in each of the view controllers. But the main bulk of the app comes from the 5 view controllers of the app, with the first one being the starting view controller, which is what the user is greeted by when they first start up the app. The main hello and the main message kind of display basic information about the app, but the main goal of the starting view controller is to allow this user to sign into his Gmail account if he chooses to. This is done by calling the Google APIs and the Google sign-in delegates to sign in the user securely to their Google account. It's done in this method, and the user's email address is stored in the user email. When the user quits the application will sign out from the Google's from their email address just for safety purposes. Now here they can create groups. Click the create groups button, which will send them to the view controller. The view controller is the main view of the application. It displays all the groups that the user has created so far in a table view and a table view cell format, with each table view being a custom group table view cell showing their group image and the group name. The view controller, that's just the general gist of it. The view controller also is what transitions into the add group view controller. If the user wishes to add a group, the user can click the plus sign at the top right hand corner of the view controller and be greeted by the add group view controller, whose main goal is to take in user information and based on that information create a group and save it to core data. Now you see some of the text fields and text views. Their purpose is to get the information related to the group and save it. Some of the functions implemented are basic, just text field and text view delegate methods. The select and the image picker controller utilizes these delegates to open up a view controller showing the saved photos album from which the user can select the group image. And all this information, cancel group goes back to the view controller without saving anything. Add a group, based on this information, create a group, add that group to core data, and go back to the view controller. Invite person opens up the web view. So add group view controller has a web view, which the view controller uses to, the add group view controller presents for the user to add other invitees in, as well as the add group view controller uses the group information, the participants core data model, to handle the main functionality. And now the core data is split into 2 entities of group information and participants, where the group information has a one-to-many relationship with the participants. Each group has its own name, description, address, and an image, but many participants, thus the one-to-many. And each participant has its own email and the associated group. The add to group utilizes the entities and the core data functionality to save the group and their participants accordingly. Now, within the add group view controller, one of the major things that the user could do is actually look for nearby places which he could take his friends to. And that is done by the find button, which will segue the user into the query view controller. Now the main goal of the query view controller is to search for nearby addresses that are related to events that's taking place nearby. When the query view controller is first opened, the user is greeted by a notification that asks the user if he wants to allow the controller to if he wants to allow the app to use the current location. The user allows the app to get the current location. That information will be stored in these variables. And the user has two options. He could either choose the Eventsful API and the Google Places API. How this works is the user can enter an event that he wants to partake in, say for example concerts, and then enter a location at which he wants the event to take place. And based on that information, he could click the Search Nearby Events button, which is the event button, which will fire the Eventsful API. And the Eventsful API, based on those two parameters and the event API key, return a bunch of JSON data. And the view controller uses the JSON parser to parse the information accordingly and display all the addresses at which the events that the user is interested in takes place. The user can also press the Google button or Search Nearby button, which will open up a different controller, which is all powered by the Google Places API, which shows all the nearby spots to the user's current location and allows the user to search for a location if he wants and select that location, and that address is also filled in here. Now the main goal of this is just to use the APIs to find the user an appropriate location or an appropriate venue to which he wants to take his friends. Once that information is retrieved, the user can save or cancel the query. Cancel the query just returns the user back to the ad group view controller without doing anything. But if the user wishes to save the query, what the user can do is click the save button, which will take him back to the ad group view controller and automatically fill in the address text field with the address that is obtained here. So that's the main goal of the query view controller. Once they have gotten their address and they saved that address, and the address is auto-filled in this view controller, the user can choose to save or cancel the group. If the user cancels the group, it just goes back to the main view controller, the main table view, and does not show anything. However, if the user manages to save it, it saves it to core data and displays the view controller with the new group that the user created. From the new group that the user created, he could go into the detailed group view controller, which displays detailed information about the group, along with the participants, the image, description, along with the map view showing the map of where the event is taking place. Some of the methods here implemented are just to make the map view work. So getLongLat is the user passes an address, and based on the address, show the map. So that's the main goal of the detail group, just to show detailed information about the group. Here the user can choose to edit, which then will segue him back to the add group view controller, which then he will edit the information, and then save that information. Then he'll be thrown back to the view controller where he'll be shown his edited group. So that's the main goal of all the view controllers. The MVC architecture is about the three structures: view, controller, and the model interact with each other. In our case, the view handles the output of information, such as the group and each of the group's information. The controller takes that info and relays it to the model. The model handles all the data. The controller adds and fetches from the model, which is represented by the core data in this case. There are some problems with the current implementation of the MVC architecture, and that will be discussed briefly later on. So the view is the main display. The only job of the view is to display all the groups as well as each of the groups' information to the user, and that's all that the view does. Some of the things that the view lets the controller know if the user added or wants to add or wants to edit a group. It lets the controller know if the user is interacting with the text field or text view. The view will let the controller know how the user is navigating through the app. And it will let the controller know if the user has swiped to delete a particular group, for example. Now the controller is kind of the main brain. Essentially what it does, it adds the groups into core data for storage. It will let the view know display the groups. It will call the appropriate APIs to show the nearest event and fill in the view accordingly. It'll update the table view when a user is added. It'll fetch details about a particular group, and it'll handle the user interactions with each of the UI objects. These are just general ideas. But what I mean in specific is that, for example, in the Google's API, the controller is what fires the call to the web application to return the appropriate data that is needed, and then passes that data to the view to be outputted. It also takes in the data from the view, such as the group information data, and using that data, adds it to core data or adds it to the model for storage. So I can see here, once a new group is created, it updates the model. Once a group is deleted, it also updates the model. For a group, you save the group, the activity address, the list of the participants, and so on and so forth. The model, as you can see here, we discussed about the model earlier in the class diagram picture. The groups, one-to-many relationship with the participants and each. And essentially, what the model is supposed to do, if a group information has been deleted or edited, the model verifies the controller, yes, that such an action has been executed. If the address or the location has been changed, notify the controller of that change, and sends the controller information about all the groups. So when the controller executes a fetch request, the model should be able to return the appropriate fetch and return the appropriate group and the appropriate list of the participants, and then so on and so forth. The capabilities and the limitations of the project. Some of the capabilities is the Eventsful API, Gmail, and the Google Map and the Google Places API. These APIs configure the user to allow the user to sign into his application. The Eventsful API, the Google Map, and the Google Places API allows the user to get the nearby events and display it on the map. However, the problem is that I had the lack of a personal Mac computer, therefore a lack of admin privileges. I do not have a personal Mac computer, therefore I could not use CocoaPods, which would make the download and the installation of all the APIs and all the frameworks much more smoother. Since I did not have that, I had to manually install a bunch of files, which resulted in too much space. For an iOS application, I feel like because I had to manually download a bunch of the frameworks, it became a little too much on a little too much space. The app took a little too much space than it needed to be, and because of that, it's not that portable, and it's a little process heavy due to this. And some of the limitations mainly that I want to talk about is that the core data and encapsulation of data. Much of the add to the core data and the fetch from the core data was done in the view controller rather than in the core data or the data files. This was a kind of a misunderstanding on my part that I wasn't able to fix until much later. But that's one of the limitations of the app that, if fixed, would allow the app to properly implement the MVC architecture. So the lessons learned, I learned how to properly implement the MVC architecture with core data. I understood that the adding and the fetching of the core data should be done within specific data files. Because of the much of the research that I put in, I was able to understand. I learned a lot about CocoaPods and the built-in tools, and a lot of the constructs of Swift that allows you to make really wonderful iOS apps. And one of the biggest lessons I learned is probably that I had no introduction whatsoever to Swift at all. I was completely new to the language, and throughout this class, I was able to put all that I learned together into creating and building full-fledged iOS apps. Some of the suggestions I have for this class is that I really enjoyed the project layout. I thought that was much more practical and useful than an exam layout. I learned more from having to do a project than I would have ever learned from having to sit down and write an exam, for example. So I really enjoyed that aspect of the class. Some general suggestions just for the class in general. I think it would have been helpful to have examples. These two kind of go hand in hand. Essentially what I mean to say is essentially have some sort of examples that show multiple concepts interleaved with each other. For example, if we were learning about CloudKit, show how the CloudKit interacts with the MVC, or how it's implemented with the MVC, for example, or if core data is taught, show how that is implemented with MVC. I had mentioned earlier that one of the problems that of this app was it didn't properly implement the MVC architecture, in that the controller is what added to the core data and fetched from the core data rather than having a separate data file which did that operations. That's because I actually tried it and it didn't work. So I just assumed that maybe that's how core data worked because I had no prior experience to core data and the MVC architecture. I was completely new, and because of that, I didn't properly know how to implement that in relation to the MVC, or how to properly implement core data in relation to the MVC, which um, really limited this app, I feel like, in a way. But that's just one general suggestion I have. Overall, I really enjoyed this class. Um, I enjoyed this final project and I learned a lot from it.